guys, welcome back. And this video we're looking at outcome 1, key knowledge 7, management skills. So this is following on from the last key knowledge, which was management styles. So now we're looking at something called management skills. Okay, so here is our study design for the outcome. And this is what we're looking at here. And you can see management skills including, and it lists about 6, I think, there. And when you look at what they are, communication, delegation, planning, and so on, it gives you an idea of what we're talking about when we are talking about management skills. So first off, let's talk about what do we mean by management skill itself, okay? So if you had to define management skill in and of itself, as opposed to the individual skills we're going to look at, you could define it as this: the ability to do something as a result of training, experience, or a combination of both. Makes sense? Now, the point here is, to be effective, managers need a really wide range of skills. And there's also a close relationship between management styles and skills, which we actually look at in the next key knowledge dot point. And each of the management styles that we previously looked at kind of emphasizes different management skills. So we kind of get onto that more in the next key knowledge dot point, which talks about the relationship between the styles and the skills that we look at. Now, it's also worth kind of pointing out that managers themselves may not have the full range of management skills. But when you're a manager, you build a team around you. So what you want to do is make sure that you have as broad a range of management skills kind of covered off between your management team as you possibly can, okay? Now, let's get straight into the 6 skills. Starting off, we'll take them in order that they're in study design. I'm going to start off with communication. So here's a couple of different definitions for you. Now, I'm going to point out here the definitions I'm going to provide for you during this video for each of the skills. They're quite sort of specific. Like, you could Google a definition for communication. You could Google a definition for delegation, communicate, all of the ones we're going to look at, right? But the VCAR tend to be quite specific in what they're looking for. The definitions that I'm going to give you here are the ones provided in textbook. They're the ones that VCAR have provided themselves in their examiners' reports with their suggested or high scoring responses. So it's worth kind of probably learning fairly accurately the definitions I'm going to give you here. I've actually given you a couple of different options here. That's 2 different definitions you see there. You could kind of go with either. So the process of creating, exchanging information between people that produces a required response, or communication involving the transfer of information between a sender and receiver, including the receipt of feedback. So the idea is here, it kind of emphasizes that it's a 2-way street, okay? It's not just a one-way thing, okay? That's both of those kind of bear that out. So make sure you use something which gets this idea that communication is 2-way. It can be either verbal or non-verbal. And it's a key skill because managers need to communicate with a really broad range of stakeholders. Now, we looked at stakeholders, key knowledges 3 and 4. If you remember back there, it's a really broad range of different types of people that business managers, business owners need to communicate with. So it's a really, really important skill to kind of be across. And there's those, just a reminder there of those stakeholders that we looked at in those key knowledge dot points. And again, it's really, really important because managers do spend a lot of their time in discussion, in conversation with people, whether it's employees, with suppliers, customers, whoever it might be. Managers spend a lot of their time basically just communicating. A lot of their job revolves around that. So it's a really, really key skill that they need to have. Just look, depending on the question you might get asked around here, just going to introduce a couple of different types of communication. Reading is one type of communication. So you can see what it is there. So interpreting, understanding different types of information, reports, emails, graphs, charts, policies, contracts, all that sort of thing. So that's one type of communication that they're going to need to be across. Writing is effectively producing all of that stuff that they need to be able to read and interpret. And then speaking with individuals, one-on-one, small groups, large groups. And again, can emphasize with all this communication, this idea of two-way, it's a two-way street. A saying that I really like, and it was kind of in my previous sales careers, in recruitment particularly, it was always kind of drummed into me. We have two ears and one mouth. Use them in that proportion effectively. So that's saying down there, you should be kind of listening roughly twice as much as you speak. Look, twice as much, it's kind of whatever. It's not an exact science, but the point is you need to be probably listening more than you're speaking if you're communicating effectively. Skill 2, delegation. There's your definition there in purple. So the assignment of authority and responsibility to another person. Normally that is from the manager to a subordinate or a team member, for them to carry out specific tasks or activities. Okay, nothing too complicated there. I think you understand what we mean by delegation. So this is a really core management skill, which involves managers basically deciding which work they're going to do themselves and which work they're going to get their team to do effectively. Why does this need to happen? So why is it a key management skill? First off, time. Obviously, a manager cannot do everything themselves in a business. Lack of experience or knowledge. Managers are not necessarily the masters of everything that needs to happen within the business. Okay, there might be people better suited within the business to carry out certain tasks. It frees up time. I mean, it's linking back to time here, but it frees up that time for managers to concentrate on more important stuff that managers should be looking after. So high-level tasks such as strategic planning, for example. Another reason that you can use delegation, or managers use delegation, it's a really, really good way to develop the more junior employees by providing them with extra skills and experience. So, for example, if you have, as the manager, have identified some future potential managers within your team, you could start delegating more and more tasks, more and more responsibility to them to kind of upskill them so that when the time comes and a management position may become available, they're kind of ready to slot into it. So they've already got some of that experience that need to do that job. And another really, really key one is if the manager's delegating appropriately and properly, it means that work can continue in the absence of the manager. So the manager doesn't have to be there for the business to continue. Things don't just come to a stop. So the manager might be off sick, they might be away on meetings, they might be on holiday. But regardless, if you're delegating properly and you've got all the tasks that need to be done covered by people, it means that work can continue. Now, worth pointing out a couple of times when you should not delegate. Okay, so it's not always appropriate to delegate certain tasks at certain times. Number one, high cost, high risk decisions. So there's certain decisions that need to be made by the manager or senior level management. You're not going to delegate stuff like that. Like if this is a really high risk decision, and the impact could be pretty severe if things go wrong, that's the kind of thing that you're probably going to keep on board yourself as the manager and not delegate that out to other people. Strategic decisions. So those first two kind of similar. So yeah, anything to do high level strategy, probably going to be sticking with the manager. Confidential issues. So if the task involves some kind of confidential information or something which certain people shouldn't be knowing, then again, that might be something the manager wants to kind of keep on board themselves. And then finally, when the employee being delegated to is not trained up enough or not skilled enough to actually complete the delegated tasks. So it's all good and well delegating stuff to subordinates, to your team members, but you've got to think, are they actually able to carry out the task that you're going to be delegating to them? Okay, sometimes delegation does not happen when it really should be happening. So here's just some examples of when that can be the case. So sometimes managers are fearful of delegating because they fear that the subordinate, the team member, is going to let them down. Okay. Sometimes the manager fears that the subordinate will do too good a job and actually outshine them. That I've seen that happen many times in the past. Sometimes the manager's fearful of letting their team look too good, because if you're thinking about future job opportunities, If they're getting all this experience and doing a really good job, then maybe they're going to get the job that the manager wanted themselves. Sometimes the manager might have a lack of trust in their team members. And then finally, the manager wanting to be in control and doing everything themselves. That kind of, if you think about the management styles we looked at, that might be your autocratic manager. Remember, we talked about that being kind of like a control freak, not wanting to relinquish control, controlling everything yourself. So that type of manager often finds it quite difficult to delegate because they just want to be in control of everything themselves. Okay, skill number 3, planning. Now, again, I point out this is a fairly accurate definition. So it's quite difficult sometimes, even though in your own mind you might go, yeah, I know what planning is. I could explain what planning is, but you do need to be quite accurate with your wording in these descriptions. So if you look at this one, a future-oriented, formalized decision-making process. Involves a process of establishing some objectives that the business wants to achieve and then working out how they're going to be achieved. Okay, so that's a pretty accurate definition, but it kind of covers all the bases that you need to cover in a good answer if you had to define planning in this subject. So basically what's happening is here, we're defining our goals, we are establishing what resources we need, and we're going to outline how we're going to achieve those goals. Okay, and the whole point of doing this is it reduces the uncertainty, it minimizes risk, and it actually maximizes the chances of the business seeing success. You know, you plan. Think about your VCE. You should have some kind of plan. If you have an ATAR that you need to hit at the end of year 12, you want to have some kind of plan in place about how you're going to achieve it. The more planning and thought you put into the process, the greater the chance that you're going to see success, or it minimizes the risk of you not achieving that ATAR that you're trying to achieve. Okay. A saying at the bottom there, proper prior planning prevents pitiful poor performance. Okay, classic business saying. I've heard lots of different versions of that. Some of them are less, a little ruder than that one, perhaps, which you may have heard. But yeah, that saying kind of is just a really good kind of baseline saying for business. Okay, you don't plan, or another way to say this I've heard is fail to plan, plan to fail. Okay, there's lots of versions of that saying, but they just kind of emphasize the importance of good planning in the business. Now, levels of planning, okay, just putting some more meat on these bones. So depending on what questions you're asked, you need to score more marks. These are areas you can go to if needed. Okay, so we talk about 3 different levels of planning. So we can start at the bottom, operational planning, which is taken by frontline managers, sort of the lowest level of manager. And this is the planning for sort of short-term goals, day-to-day stuff that goes on within the business. Okay. Then the next level up, we take it to what we call tactical planning. This is planning undertaken by middle management. And this is planning for stuff that's going to be carrying out across sort of 1 to 2 years as a time scale. And then our top level planning is what we call strategic planning. And this is undertaken by our most senior management. And this is planning for stuff which we're looking ahead now, sort of 2 to 5 years. Okay, so just a little bit of extra information, which, look, you won't often need this stuff, but if you're trying to answer, a question on planning, which has a lot of marks, it's not going to be enough just to give the definition. You're going to need to back that up with some extra information, and this is where this type of information can sometimes come in useful. Finally, a process for planning. Okay, you might be asked, just to outline a process that might be used when undertaking business planning. 5 steps you've got there. Again, there's lots of versions of this, but this is a fairly standard one. Set the goals, gather information using SWOT, come back to that in a second. Establish promoting and restraining factors, develop an action plan, and evaluate and review. So really, you would never need to go further than just basically outlining that process. You would never need to describe the steps in any more detail, but it's worth pointing out their SWOT. SWOT is often mentioned in planning. SWOT is a really commonly used planning tool in business. SWOT standing for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And what it basically means is you get your management team to sit around a table, and it's basically a big discussion, usually with a whiteboard. and you're basically writing lists. So you sit there and you think about your business, and you think, what are the strengths that our business had? These are the things that we want to continue to do. These are the things we're good at. These are the things we do well. These are the things we want to continue to do in the future. And then you flip it around and you look at weaknesses. Okay, we say, okay, what is it in our business what we are not so good at? What are the things that we need to be improving on? And then you kind of itemize those things. And then you move down to that bottom level, and now you're looking externally. You look at what opportunities are perhaps out there in the broader business context that we might be able to take advantage of as we move into the future. And then finally, what are the external threats that we need to be aware of? Again, not from within our business, but from the broader business environment or the broader society at large. What are the things that we need to be aware of so that we're ready to act on if they happen, to minimize any negative impact on a business? We'll actually practice a swotting class, so you'll kind of get an idea of how that works. Skill 4, leadership, really, really key one. The skill of guiding or influencing workers towards the achievement of business objectives. So basically, this is all about getting other people to do what you want them to do. Simple as that, okay? Getting others to do what needs to be done. That's what leadership is. Okay, it involves a whole bunch of stuff, as itemized here. Okay, if you're a strong leader, you're going to be motivating, you're going to be engaging, you're going to be inspiring confidence in your team. You need to be a great communicator to be a good leader. You're going to be acting as a role model, lead by example. If you're going to be a good leader, it really helps to understand those who you are leading, okay? So what I mean by that is their personalities, their values, their emotions, kind of what makes them tick. All this kind of comes together in something we call emotional intelligence. So we'll just flick to that before we continue with that list. Emotional intelligence, a term you've probably heard before, the ability to perceive, interpret, demonstrate, control, evaluate, and use our emotions to communicate with and effectively relate to others. Okay, being aware of and controlling and expressing our own emotions, and handling interpersonal relationships judiciously and empathetically. Understanding and using our emotions to understand and relieve stress, both our own stress and that in our team, and overcoming challenges and diffusing conflict between people when it arises. So yeah, emotional intelligence. Obviously you've got IQ. So emotional intelligence is measured by EQ. So we have EQ and IQ. And look, it's often said that to be successful in business or to be effective as a leader, this EQ is more important than IQ. Okay. Just going back to our list, finishing off there, other things that are involved in good leadership, inspiring loyalty and commitment in your team. So a good leader, you'll tend to find their team members are going to be loyal to them and they're going to be committed to them. A good leader is good at resolving conflicts. That was mentioned before when we're talking about emotional intelligence. And a good leader is going to be able to respond quickly to change. And change is actually what Unit 4 is all about. A really, really key part of managing a business. Now, this is leadership is really particularly closely related to those management styles that we looked at in the previous video. And in fact, management styles are often referred to as leadership styles. So if you saw in some kind of print media leadership styles, they're often used, that term is often used interchangeably with management styles. So for our language in this subject, VCE Business Management, we talk about management styles, but often in business they're talked about leadership styles. And here is just a quote after the death of Steve Jobs, the founder and CEO of Apple in 2011. Richard Branson, who heads up the Virgin Empire. So both very, very successful leaders, very, very successful businesses, very, very wealthy business people. So basically, Richard Branson here is comparing his leadership style with that of Steve Jobs. And I guess what's interesting here is, he talks about basically, if you look at what that says, Steve Jobs was very much an autocratic manager, whereas Richard Branson is much more laissez-faire. But both styles obviously work because both of these gentlemen were hugely successful in business. Okay, the fifth skill, decision making. Okay, simply the ability to choose the most appropriate course of action to take from a range of alternatives. Okay, so we have a range of alternatives ahead of us which we could go down. So a good decision maker is going to be able to choose the best of those alternatives. So note that if the management style being used is task focused, so if you've done the horizontal spectrum, if you like, with autocratic and persuasive to the left, this process is going to be carried out by the manager alone. If a more people-focused style is being used, so participative through to laissez-faire, then as we move through the spectrum, this decision-making process is increasingly being carried out with the employees being more involved in that process. A process, and again, there's lots of processes that you would, if you Google process for decision making, you're going to find lots. This is a pretty standard 6-step process. And once again, you would never need to need to write an essay about this or give any detail here, but it might be handy just to be able to identify and outline a process to just go through these steps here. So a 6-step process that a manager might use to be successful in decision making. Identify the problem and create your goal, develop the alternatives, evaluate those alternatives, then make the decision, implement that decision, the solution, and then monitor and evaluate the solution, which might lead you to kind of coming back to the beginning and setting some new goals and retweaking things and then kind of going through again. So you would never need to do too much with this, but it is worth having in your notes and worth knowing because it can be useful in certain questions. Okay, now our 6th and final skill in study design, interpersonal. So these are the skills used by a person to interact with others effectively. It involves being able to communicate with a wide range of people and develop positive relationships. Okay, so this relies on a really similar skill set as leadership that we just talked about, including that reliance on emotional intelligence. Okay, working well with others, being empathetic, being a great communicator, being honest and ethical in all of your dealings, all of this kind of stuff feeds into strong interpersonal skills. And that is it. That's a wrap for Key Knowledge 7. So in the next video, we're going to be looking at how those management styles and management skills are kind of related to each other and what the relationship between them is. But until then, I'll see you later. Cheers for now.